Before you hear her story, do one thing: imagine walking into a forest so silent, so frozen, so brutally white that even your own breath sounds foreign. Now imagine you're 12 miles from the nearest road, your phone is dead, your tracks are erased by wind, and the only heartbeat you can rely on is your own. If stories of courage, survival, and heartbreaking twists grip you, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to read will drag you into a world where every second is a fight against the cold, against fear, against nature itself, and against a truth far darker than the snow. Now, step into the forest with her. From the moment Lena Carver opened her eyes beneath the bruised gray sky, cold gnawed at her like a creature with teeth, biting through the sleeves of her torn jacket as if fabric meant nothing in this monstrous, soundless wilderness. She didn't remember falling. She didn't remember the moment the world had turned from roaring wind and screaming metal into a void of white silence, only that she had woken with snow packed against her cheek and the metallic taste of blood on her tongue, disoriented and alone except for the distant echo of creaking trees that bowed under their burden of ice. The forest around her was endless, a cathedral of frozen giants stretching so far in every direction that the horizon felt swallowed, and the sky, heavy with another storm, pressed upon her like a warning. She pushed herself up, legs trembling, breath bursting in front of her like tiny, frantic ghosts, and the first thing she noticed was the absence of footprints behind her. Her crash site, wherever it was, had been swallowed by drifting snow overnight. Nature had erased her existence in a single winter breath. Her father always said she was stubborn, too brave, too careless, but she never imagined stubbornness would be the thing standing between her and the kind of cold that could freeze a life in minutes. She scanned the tree shadows, expecting movement, noise, anything that registered life, but the forest was terrifyingly still, as if holding itself back, watching her, waiting. Hunger gnawed beneath her ribs, but fear sat heavier. She remembered the last thing before darkness. The crack of ice on the mountain road, the tires sliding, her mother screaming her name, the car flipping through the guardrail like a toy kicked by a giant. And then, nothing. No car, no road, no mother. Nothing but trees and the knowledge that she was the only one left standing. She wrapped her arms around herself and moved, forcing her numb feet through knee-deep snow, each step a small war against gravity and exhaustion. The forest floor felt uneven, as if something beneath the surface shifted when her boots pressed down, roots, maybe, or burrows from animals she didn't want to meet, but she kept moving because the alternative was stopping, and stopping meant dying. "Mom," she shouted once, her voice cracking through the air like a splintered branch. No answer, only the eerie, endless hush of snow sifting from heavy branches. She didn't shout again. Hours stretched, or maybe it was minutes. Time felt strange. The light never changed. Everything was washed in the same dim blue, as though the sun had abandoned this place long ago. Her fingers stiffened inside her gloves. Her shoulder throbbed with every step. But she pushed through the biting wind, clinging to a desperate hope that she would stumble upon a road, a cabin, smoke, boot tracks, anything human. Instead, she found the first twist. At the base of an enormous dead spruce, where the wind hadn't reached, where snow still lay untouched and smooth as porcelain, she saw something unnatural: tiny, rhythmic indentations in the snow, spaced too evenly to be animal tracks. They were soft, light, almost deliberate. Human footsteps. No, too small, child-sized, fresh, only hours old, and they didn't walk away. They circled the tree in an almost perfect ring, then vanished. Vanished. As though the walker had disappeared into thin air. Lena's breath caught. Her pulse hammered. She stepped closer, studying the prints, feeling the forest lean closer around her. Her mind split between fear and the irrational hope that whoever made them might help her, but everything in her bones whispered that something was wrong. Nothing about this pattern felt human, and nothing about the disappearance of the tracks made sense. Snow could bury them, yes, but not in a perfect ring. Not instantly. Not like this. A sudden snap echoed behind her. Her heart lurched. She spun. Nothing. The trees loomed, silent. Watching. She backed away from the footprint ring slowly, trying to force steady breaths, reminding herself she wasn't hallucinating, she wasn't freezing, she wasn't losing her mind. Not yet. She turned her steps toward a distant outcrop of rock, darker than the rest of the forest, perhaps a cave or a shelter. But the forest wasn't done with her. Halfway up the slope, her foot sank deeper than expected, punching through a crust of snow into a hollow beneath. She pitched forward with a cry, arms flailing, and crashed chest first into a cavity. The snow caved around her, dumping her into a shallow pit lined with tangled branches and strips of torn fabric, blue fabric. Familiar fabric. Her mother's scarf. Lena choked on her breath. The scarf was half frozen, stiff, but unmistakable. "Mom," she whispered, voice breaking. She dug frantically, throwing snow aside with her bare hands until her fingers burned. No body, no signs of blood, no signs of struggle, just the scarf, and beneath it, something metallic glinting through the ice. A small silver locket, her mother's, and it was warm, warm, as though someone had held it minutes ago. Her heart floored. How could anything be warm in this hellish cold? She held the locket to her chest, breath shaking, mind racing. Someone had been here, someone who had her mother's things. Someone whose presence hadn't left warmth but stolen it. The wind shifted then, a low moan through the branches that almost sounded like a voice whispering her name, or maybe she imagined it because fear twisted sounds into shapes that didn't exist. But then she saw it, another footprint half buried in the snow near the pit's edge. Child-sized, fresh, leading away through the trees. And this time, not alone. Beside it was a second set, larger, heavier, dragging slightly, like the owner moved with uneven weight. Human, injured, stalking, hunting. She didn't know, but she knew with absolute certainty that she wasn't alone in the forest, and whoever was out there had been close. Very close. The sky deepened to a darker steel, foretelling a storm. The wind sharpened like a blade. Lena forced herself up the slope, fighting panic, clutching the warm locket, her only proof that her mother might still be alive, and followed the tracks toward the darker part of the forest, drawn by equal parts hope and dread. But the deeper she went, the more wrong the forest felt. Trees stood closer together, their bark scarred with long horizontal marks like claw rakes or warnings. The snow felt heavier underfoot, as if something beneath the surface shifted with her weight. The air grew thicker, almost humming, as though the forest itself breathed. Her steps quickened, her heartbeat thundered, she sensed movement at the edges of her vision, shadows darting between trees, too quick and too quiet to identify. Once she caught a glimpse of something pale slipping behind a trunk, but when she turned, it was gone. By the time she reached the mouth of a narrow ravine, night had already begun to fall. And in the fading light, she saw the biggest twist yet. A fire, a living, crackling flame flickering behind a boulder, half sheltered from the wind, its smoke thin and barely visible. Human. Someone had built it recently, maybe minutes ago. Her hope exploded so violently it hurt. She stumbled toward it, and stopped dead when she saw the figure crouched beside it. A child, or something shaped like one. Dressed in rags of animal hide, hair tangled and white with frost, face half hidden but eyes, wide, hollow, unblinking, locked onto her the second she moved. They weren't normal eyes. They were too pale, almost silver. Lena froze. The child didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move, only stared, and then, slowly, impossibly slowly, the child raised a hand and pointed deeper into the ravine. Lena's skin crawled. Then she heard it, a sound that shook her bones. A sound no human could make. A sound coming from the direction the child pointed. Something massive, something awakening, something that wanted her. The moment that inhuman rumble vibrated through the ravine, Lena's instincts screamed louder than any words, but fear welded her boots to the snow as the pale child continued pointing into the darkness, unmoving, unblinking, almost carved from the frost itself, and Lena felt something ancient and predatory shift in the air as though the forest had inhaled and now held that breath, waiting to see whether she would obey, run, or die. The fire crackled beside the child but gave no warmth, its flames oddly low and sluggish as if the cold itself was feeding on them, and that was when she noticed something she hadn't before. There were no footprints around the child, no tracks leading to or away from the fire, as if the child had simply appeared there, materialized like a ghost out of the frozen ground, and the realization hit Lena so hard her breath caught. The child wasn't shivering, wasn't breathing fog into the air, wasn't alive in the way she understood life. The rumble sounded again, closer this time, a deep subterranean growl that made the snow tremble beneath her boots like a heartbeat, and Lena stumbled backward instinctively, her gaze darting toward the narrow rock walls rising around her, jagged and sharp like teeth closing in. The child's silver eyes didn't waver, didn't blink, only bored into her with an intensity that felt less like a plea and more like a warning, and even though every part of her wanted to flee out of the ravine, away from that terrible sound, something deeper compelled her to stay, to look, to understand, because somewhere inside that growl there was something almost familiar. Lena forced herself to breathe, though each inhale felt like stabbing knives in her lungs, and she whispered a trembling, "Who are you?" Even though she knew she wouldn't get an answer, and when the child tilted its head in a slow, unnatural motion, Lena saw something hanging around the child's neck. Something metallic, something she knew instantly because she had seen it every day since her father gave it to her mother on their anniversary. Her mother's second locket, the twin to the one she held against her chest, warm even now. Her knees nearly buckled. The world spun. The cold dug deeper into her bones, and that was when the growl transformed into something worse. A breath, hot and moist, exhaling from the darkness inside the ravine, carrying a scent of wet fur and decay that didn't belong to anything human. Snow crunched behind her and she spun, heart lurching, expecting another monster, but instead she saw movement between the trees at the ravine's mouth. Silhouettes, tall, thin, gliding silently across the snow with unnatural grace. For a moment she thought they were people coming to help her, rescuers, hikers, anyone human, but then the nearest figure stepped fully into view and her hope died instantly. It wasn't human. Its limbs were too long, too jointless, hanging like threads from a scarecrow frame, its head tilted unnaturally far to one side, as if the neck had been broken long ago, and yet it moved with sickening intent, its empty black eyes locked onto her like a predator assessing prey. Lena stumbled back toward the fire, but the fire suddenly hissed, lowered, then snuffed out entirely, plunging the ravine into deeper cold as the pale child slowly stood up, still pointing, but now toward the monster behind her, not deeper into the ravine, and when Lena realized this, she understood the horrifying truth. The child wasn't pointing at her to follow the sound, he was pointing at her to run. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She dashed through the snow, boots slipping, arms flailing, the cold slicing at her exposed skin as the long-limbed creature lunged with a speed that shattered the laws of nature, its feet barely sinking into the snow, its breaths coming in slow gurgles that echoed through the trees. Lena didn't dare look back. She could feel the air bending behind her as the creature closed in, but she forced herself toward the narrow exit of the ravine, where the trees were thicker and the ground steeper, hoping the creature's unnatural shape would slow it down. Snow whipped into her face, blinding her, but adrenaline shoved her forward, up the slope, toward a cluster of fallen logs that formed a natural barricade, and as she squeezed through, the creature slammed into the wood with a crack that sent splinters raining like shrapnel, its inhuman howl splitting the air, rising and falling in a cadence that felt almost searching. She crawled up the slope on her hands and knees, lungs burning, heart hammering, the forest spinning around her in dizzying blur, but something grabbed her ankle, thin, bony fingers, ice cold, pulling her back. Lena kicked wildly, screaming, and her boot struck something hard. The grip loosened, she scrambled forward, slipping, kicking, clawing through the snow until she reached the top of the ridge and tumbled over the edge, sliding down the other side in a cascade of white as branches scratched at her arms and face. She crashed at the bottom, gasping, trembling, her mind shattering between terror and exhaustion, but the forest around her had changed again. The trees here stood wider apart, their trunks thicker, older, their presence strangely comforting compared to the nightmare behind her, and for a moment she thought she had escaped. But the silence was wrong. Too complete, too absolute, no wind, no animals, no breathing, not even her own, until she forced her lungs to move. Slowly she rose, forcing her stiff limbs to cooperate, and as her eyes adjusted, she saw something ahead, something impossibly out of place in the middle of a frozen wilderness. A cabin, small, tilting, half swallowed by snow, its roof sagging under layers of ice, its windows cracked, its door hanging crooked, but there was smoke curling from the chimney. Thin, faint, but real, human. She stumbled toward it, each step heavier than the last, her vision blurring at the edges, her fingers numb even inside her gloves. Everything inside her screamed to get inside, find warmth, find safety, find answers. She reached the door and pushed it open with her shoulder, expecting a creak, but it swung silently, too easily, as if someone had oiled it recently. Heat washed over her. Blessed, impossible heat. A fire roared inside the stone hearth, crackling brightly, warm enough to make her eyes sting with tears, and for a moment she couldn't breathe from the rush of relief. Then she saw the man sitting beside the fire. He was old, far older than she could place, with a beard white as snow and eyes that glowed a piercing blue, clear and sharp even in the dim light. He didn't flinch at her entrance, didn't rise, didn't reach for a weapon, he simply looked at her as though he had been expecting her for years. "You're late," he said in a gravelly voice that seemed to rumble directly into her bones. And Lena, too exhausted to question, too terrified to think, whispered the only thing that mattered, "Do you know where my mother is?" The old man didn't smile. He didn't soften, he only stared with eyes that carried storms inside them. And then he said something that made her blood freeze harder than the forest ever could. "Child, she never left this forest. None of them ever do." Before Lena could speak, before she could breathe, the door slammed shut behind her, on its own. The door slammed with a force that rattled the cabin's walls, and Lena spun, heart racing, only to find the old man slowly rising from his chair, his shadow stretching across the floor like something detached from the fire's glow, and he studied her with an expression that was neither cruel nor kind, just unbearably tired, as he told her that the forest was not just a place but a border, a thin line between the living and the lost, and those who entered after dusk were claimed by whatever ancient force had slept beneath its roots long before humans walked these lands. Her mother, he said, had survived the crash but wandered too deep, drawn by the same pale child Lena had seen, a guardian spirit of sorts, bound to lead the living away from the true monsters lurking beneath the snow, monsters like the long-limbed creature that hunted her, broken humans twisted by years of cold, hunger, and darkness until they were no longer recognizable. Lena felt the truth settle heavy in her bones as the man opened his hand to reveal the torn piece of her mother's jacket he had found days earlier near the riverbank, and her breath shattered when he added, quietly, that her mother had fought to keep her alive long enough for rescue and had left behind the warm locket as a sign, knowing Lena would follow it. Suddenly, the floor shook with a familiar inhuman howl, closer than ever, and the old man grabbed his staff, shoving open a hidden back door that led into a narrow tunnel beneath the cabin, urging Lena to run while he stayed behind to hold off the creature. She hesitated, tears freezing on her cheeks, not wanting to leave him, not wanting to accept what it meant. But the forest roared with the arrival of the monster, and she fled into the tunnel as the old man's final shout echoed after her. Live, girl. Live for the ones who didn't. She crawled through darkness until she emerged miles away on the edge of the forest, where rescue lights flashed through the trees and voices called her name. She collapsed into their arms, clutching her mother's locket, whispering a promise into the wind that she would never forget the child with silver eyes, the man who saved her, or the forest that almost claimed her. And as the rescuers carried her toward safety, Lena glanced back one last time, only to see a small pale figure standing between the trees, watching her leave, and this time, the child smiled.